Hi, this is Jamie Franklin, curator here at the Bennington Museum. Welcome to another tour at 10. Today I'm standing in our center gallery in front of one of my favorite paintings in the museum. This is a portrait, Charlie Smith at His Barn by Francis Colburn. And Colburn was really one of the kind of pivotal artists here in Vermont during the 1930s and 40s. He was born up in Fairfax, Vermont, ended up graduating from the University of Vermont in 1934, but he did have ties here in Bennington. During the mid to late 1930s, he was an active participant in the Fine Arts Project, which was part of the WPA. You might recognize his work from our exhibition, Crash to Creativity, which we had about the New Deal here in Vermont back in 2018. But he's been in storage for the last few years, so we're hanging some new things in our center gallery during these 3 months that we're closed to the public. So he's going to be back on view, and he's really kind of an iconic image that depicts the kind of classic Yankee farmer, kind of his stoicism framed against the red barn, his face, forking hay, putting in the hard work that's required of Vermont farmers. And even though he's named Charlie Smith, I think it's more of an allegorical portrait. And these sorts of allegorical portraits of kind of classic Yankee farmers and hard workers is something that was popular during this period in the 1930s in Vermont, during the WPA. And one of the other portraits, pictures that I've hung here in the center gallery here while we're closed, is another similar example. So why don't we walk down to the other end of the gallery and take a look at that. So here we are in front of a painting by the title of Granite Hills by Ruth G. Mould. Ruth Mould was another artist. She was born up in Morrisville, Vermont in 1894, grew up in Vermont like Francis Colburn. So these are two kind of artists that have real deep roots in Vermont. She studied art as a young woman, went on to study in Minneapolis and New York City with Frank Dumond, but really went on to become one of the great portrait painters here in Vermont in the 1930s and 40s. But there's a wonderful quote that I want to read by Ruth Mould that was actually in a letter to one of the museum's founding director, John Spargo, here at the museum. Mould had an exhibition here at the museum around the time that we acquired this in 1939. And she was talking to Spargo about this painting, and I just want to quote it because I think it provides insight into these sorts of kind of allegorical portraits like Charlie Smith and His Barn over there by Francis Colburn. And Ruth Mould writes, "The subject is a neighbor of mine, as set as the hills themselves, very kindly if he likes you, but as stubborn as a mule if he dislikes you. He is the caretaker and gravedigger for our cemetery. His hands are large, and because of his occupation, I did not try to make them smaller. The landscape background was adapted from a sketch of Johnson up in the northern part of the state. The little cemetery does not really come into view, but there is one called The Plot, quite like the one in my painting. All in all, it's more an attempt to interpret Vermont as I see it than to give the portrait of an individual." And so, again, I really like this idea. Yes, it depicts a very specific person, but it's more of an allegorical portrait of Vermont and the kind of classic, hardworking Yankee attitude that Vermonters had during this period in the 1930s and 40s. And during this period, during the WPA, artists were really trying to depict place, even when they were creating portraits of real people. In some way, they were depicting the kind of ethos of Vermont at the same time. So these are two portraits that are going on view here in our center gallery. You can come and see them when we reopen to the public in April, and I'll see you again soon at another tour at 10. Thank you.